Hi everyone, and welcome back to our next episode of Utterly Understandable. So you've got myself, Hamish, and Robbie Turner back to answer the next one of the questions, which today is about the difference between assembly and disassembly industries. So Robbie, you've seen a few disassembly lines in your time. How about you talk us through what they are and how they differ from standard production assembly lines?
Hi Hamish, thank you for having me. Yeah, great question. There's quite a lot about disassembly versus assembly lines that's not very well understood, but in a sense, a disassembly line is just the inverse of an assembly line. So if we think about assembly lines, assembly production, in effect, you're taking an input and you're adding more and more things to that along the way. And after adding a series of widgets to your original input, you have some sort of output. So at each gating stage, at each stage in the process, when you add that next widget, that next component, you effectively are looking for what is the cheapest component that meets my specification that I can then add to my original input to create my output. In that regard, you have what we call perfect information or close to it, in that as you continue through your production process, you can respond to changes in the market. If the price of input A falls versus the price of input B, but both achieve the same outcome to the same spec, then you can switch what input you use and therefore save money on your costing. So assembly is effectively incrementally adding additional widgets, additional inputs to your initial input to create some type of output. And because you incrementally add, you can take into account changing market dynamics, changing market topography, and in that sense, you have perfect information. You can respond. Now, from an optimization standpoint, it's a rather straightforward problem. It's just a question of looking at your inventory of inputs, looking at what's on the market, what can be procured, and deciding which is cheaper to meet your goal. Disassembly, on the other hand, is the inverse of this, and it's a much more complicated problem to model. With disassembly, we take a single input and we get multiple outputs from it. So dairy is obviously the classic one where we put in raw milk and we get powders and butter, cheese and whey, caseins and whey, for example. We get a bundle of goods as an output from our single input raw milk. Now, when we are optimizing in a disassembly context, because we are getting multiple things out of the initial input, we in effect are bound by our previous decisions. We have to make all of our decisions in one go. And what I mean by that is, if we decide to make cheese, we cannot then make skim. We cannot then make whole milk powder. If we decide to make casein, we cannot then make whole milk powder. We cannot then make cheese. We can only reconfigure with what's left. So because we are taking the building blocks out of the milk, because we are taking the components out of the milk at each step and creating a product, with what is left over, our choices become narrower. So what this means is that you're making all of your decisions in one go. Your first choice dictates your next choice. Therefore, you cannot respond to new information. You cannot respond to changes in the market topography. So with disassembly, you have perfect information in contrast to assembly when you can react to changes. Disassembly, your ability to react is far more restricted. It's very hard to adjust to changing market conditions. So effectively, disassembly increases the constraints upon the processor, and that means that you have to get that initial choice right. That means that you need an optimization solution that can factor in all of the variables, all of the multitude of, foregone choices, all of the opportunity costs to ensure that you are making the right choice up front. And that is what we're working on at Austin Data Labs.
Great. Thanks for that, Robbie. That's that was a nice, clear explanation, and I'm sure our viewers will have a much better understanding of that now. So, thanks everyone for tuning in. Keep an eye out for our next webinar. We're going to continue to do a series of these 5-minute webinars. But we'll sign off here, and we will see you next time. So, thanks from myself, Hamish, and Robbie, and for tuning in to Udderly Understandable.